Small towns were once the core of North America, and churches literally stood in their center. Decades of population and economic shifts, combined with practical challenges, have taken their toll. Rural regions and the churches that bind them now find themselves in unfamiliar territory. While so much has changed, the need for local bodies of Christ is as important as it has ever been.
But if rural North America has changed, what does it look like for the rural church to experience revival? It will begin with rediscovering the mission at the heart of the gospel, where God sends Jesus to minister to the small towns of Galilee, and Jesus sends his church to the whole world. It will be driven by visionary pastors and lay leaders who take risks and try new approaches to reach those who have no church home.
Rural Revival Summit is a 2-day digital event happening April 21st and April 22nd that will introduce you to other ministry leaders serving in small town and rural contexts to provide examples and inspiration for being the church and addressing the needs unique to your community.
At the Rural Revival Summit, you will meet other small town church leaders who understand the struggles you are facing. Hear stories from real-life practitioners who are forming new and different expressions of the church that uniquely connect with their rural settings, and explore practical approaches to church leadership and discipleship developed by fellow rural ministry leaders.
Small town North America has changed and will keep changing. The Rural Revival Summit will give you new hope for what God can do in your town, your church, and in the lives of the neighbors you love. Join us on April 21st and 22nd, 2023 for the summit. Find out more at freshexpressions.com/rural revival. Welcome back to the Rural Revival podcast. We are glad that you have joined us. And if you haven't shared with your friends about our podcast, we would love for you to do that because we want to be an encouragement to rural church leaders and to lay leaders doing interesting and innovative things in their particular context.
Yeah, and certainly as we continue to hopefully have this be a little interactive and hopefully include some of the things going on in your contexts, either through the Facebook page, which is Rural Revival Podcast Community, or certainly you can send us an email with some of those ideas. We want to share those kinds of things because one of the things I think in rural ministry that we're trying to do together is just give encouragement, give creative ideas that help, in your context. Certainly no idea if perfectly fits in another context, but sometimes you've got to have the chance to help out, and sometimes you have to have, you hear about what's going on somewhere else and then you're able to incorporate.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's going on in your own ministry. So.
Do you want to talk about what we did last weekend?
Yeah, so is a way to talk a little bit about what one of the people that we talked to in our last episode, Reverend Dale Edwards.
Episode 2.
Yeah, this is episode 3. We went to our denominational regional meeting. So we're a part of the American Baptist Churches of USA as our national denomination, and we're in Vermont, and so our region is the American Baptist Churches of Vermont and New Hampshire. Once a year, assuming there's not a pandemic, we get together at least once a year, but once a year we get together for our annual convention. And so we were there, and it was for us, Dale Edwards, who spoke at the last, Reverend Dale Edwards, who spoke in our last podcast, who we interviewed in our last podcast. It was his final one as our regional executive. He's retiring at the end of August. So had a chance to see him and hear him speak one more time. It was really a good time. And so it's worth going back. He has great stories. It's great to go back and listen to that. Also, Aaliyah Hitty was also really, really good. Our last podcast as well as an interview. So if you haven't listened to that one, go back and listen to that one. It's certainly well worth it. But
yeah, and we joke around. Dale always has stories, and so we always say hashtag Dale stories. Although he's not really online at all.
And hashtags are slowly fading. That was something we used to say 5 or 6 years ago. We were cool back.
Yeah, not so much anymore. But he does tell a couple of good stories in that episode, and it's always great to hear his stories. So we were going to talk a little bit about what's going on in our lives. last week, or was it the week before, our youngest daughter, she's had some medical issues over the years. And so in a rural area, sometimes getting healthcare is a little bit of a challenge. So she had to get a vision evaluation the other week, and
yeah, her not so much for just regular vision. She's had those a lot of times at their WellCare checks, but this has more to do with some of the way that she tracks things with her eyes and muscle movements involved in them.
Yeah, stuff that's a little bit above our heads, but we still want her to be able to read and be able to see correctly. So I brought her to that. That was an 1.5-hour drive each way to get that evaluation. And that was, I checked a bunch of places, and that was as close as we could get for that evaluation. And then after that, she needed to go to a pediatrician on a completely different, unrelated thing. And so that was another hour. So I spent 5 hours in the car that day. And the day before, our son had hurt his knee. So I had to get him checked out at the pediatrician. So that was another 2 hours of driving. So in the span of 2 days, I drove 7 hours for kids' doctor appointments.
Yeah, and if you minister in a rural area, you're used to this kind of thing. Probably on a personal level. If you do, for us, the closest hospital we would go to do a hospital visit is about a 35-minute ride away, and a lot of times it's more like an hour. And to get to the first closest major hospital is like an hour and 20 minutes drive time for us. So you're used to that, and certainly one of the things that I'm sure you've noticed as you with people as well is that particularly when people go through health challenges, when people have cancer or things like that, and they have to do multiple trips often to the doctors, it just eats time. Not that it doesn't do that in more urban and suburban areas too, but it just eats time up. And so that's not necessarily something we kind of joke or kind of smile about in rural places, but it's a reality of living here. And it's a reality of how we help minister to people in those circumstances as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to be creative about the ways that you help people out.
Someone just today asked me, can you pick up my kid? Because I'm not sure I'm going to make it back from my appointment on time, from a doctor's appointment. So that happens frequently around here. Chris, can you tell us about the fire department?
Yeah, so as part of helping you to get to know Kathleen and I a little bit better, I mentioned this in the first episode, but one of the things that I have done, I did after, we also mentioned that our church, our original church building, when we moved here, we had a fire 6 months in, and one of the things I did was go and join the fire department, which I had sort of been planning on doing anyway, but and I've gotten quite involved in the fire department. It's one of the things in a rural place. It's certainly an option for ways to connect with a group of people who obviously they're all volunteers as well. So they're there trying to do the best to help out their fellow community members as well. We have some church connections on the fire department as well, but mostly it's people who don't come to church. And it's a great way to get to know some different people. And it's obviously over the years opened up lots of ministry opportunities, both in the midst of crisis kind of circumstances, but also certainly in other ways as well. And the church and the fire department have partnered with stuff. We do trunk or treat with them every year. Mm-hmm. It's like a big town event. So that's a lot of fun. So yeah, it has become something. And my original, and I probably talked about this a little in the first episode, but my original plan was not necessarily to become a firefighter. It was mostly just to go and be a chaplain. One, when you join a rural fire department, particularly in New England, probably this is true. They probably, all the guys there, I think, know what the word chaplain means, but I don't think they've ever had a chaplain before. I think that's not entirely true. I'm sure they've had pastors who have done stuff with them before in a kind of chaplain role, but as an official thing, no, probably not. But yeah, so one of the things I recognized, though, was one of the ways I could be most helpful to them was actually, instead of just being there to provide sort of the kind of support that a chaplain would, is to be there and help with firefighting support. So I've done a lot of that, and took a bunch of firefighting classes I never thought I was going to take, and have really found it to be something that I really enjoy as well. It's, I enjoy helping other people out, and I enjoy the kind of the team aspect of what you're doing when you're firefighting, and the all that kind of stuff, the learning together and spending time together. I've really enjoyed that over the years. It's really been a blessing in my life, and I think hopefully a blessing to the fire department that I've been there over the last. We've been here 13 years. I guess I've been on the department more than 12 years now, like 12 and a half. So
yeah. You joined pretty soon after we got here. And I think I agree. I think it's been a really great way for Chris.
I get to drive really big trucks sometimes. Oh, something I always tell people, if you live in a rural area and you see a fire truck with lights on, you should get out of the way for your own safety, because I can guarantee you the person driving that fire truck, almost guarantee you. We have a bunch of guys in our department who do drive big trucks, but when I'm driving the fire truck, I am driving a truck that's way bigger than any truck I should ever be allowed to drive, that weighs way more than it should. And in a highly stressful situation. Well, or somewhat stressful situation. So get out of the way. That's why we have the lights. Just get out of the way. It's my free advice.
Absolutely. We've got stories about Chris's driving.
Oh, yeah. We'll have to save that one for
another one.
Message us if you want the
join the Facebook group.
We'll have to share that.
And we'll share it there. So each week we're going to give you a way to know that you have found the right podcast. So Chris, what are you? This is a good one for you to talk about.
Yeah. So one of the ways I think you live in a rural community is that you have to be careful. Now, as followers of Jesus, we should always be careful about what we say to people. But particularly in a rural community, you have to be careful because you do not know who is married to whom and their history necessarily, especially if you're relatively new to the rural area.
Or who you're related to.
Who you're even related to. Well, that's if you grow up in the town.
Well, that's true.
Which is, so I kind of know this inherently because I grew up in a small town, not in the town we pastor right now. I grew up in a rural town in New Hampshire, Samerton, New Hampshire. And I grew up in a church. My parents still go to the church that I grew up in. They still live at the house that I grew up in as well. And when I went to church there as a kid, at the time it was Second Baptist Church of Samerton. They've changed their name. They're now Mountain. But anyways, back when I went to church there as a kid, all four of my grandparents went to church with me every Sunday morning. Matter of fact, I usually sat with my mom's parents. We sat in the pew next to it. It was a long, and I would, Grammy would keep me, occupied as you do with a 5 or 6 year old at church. With
a calculator.
Well, the iPhones were not a thing. Very early version of the iPhone, and doodling on. Yeah. Anyways, that's what we did. And but my dad's parents also went to the church there. My dad's grandparents. He still had 2 grandparents. I'll have two of my great grandparents went to the church. Certainly at different times, I had cousins who went to the church with me. And this was not a big church. This was not like a congregation of several thousand or several hundred. We probably, even back then, it was probably like 60 to 70 people was a good Sunday. I was related to more than half of the people who went to church on Sunday. And the people who I wasn't related to, I might as well have been, particularly the other kiddos there. We spent tons of time together. We knew them really well. It was just kind of part of growing up in a small community. So I'm sure all of you who live in small communities, you're nodding along to that. Yes, of course. The people who make up your churches are often related in ways you wouldn't know. And then the other people in town who maybe aren't part of your church, but part of your wider community, they're related. They're either, and sometimes they're related and that's a good thing for them, for their relationships with one another. Sometimes it's maybe there's a negative history there. I'm sure you have some of that in your small towns as well. And learning all of those things and knowing who to ask the right question to, who can tell you those things, is an important part of navigating life or a rural place.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So our interview today, Chris, who are we interviewing?
We are interviewing Pam Morse, and we have a long, reasonably lengthy history with Pam. She makes brief mention actually in the interview of a gentleman named Skip Schwartz, who started the ministry that she currently has birthed, that she's been serving at for
a long time.
Many years, more than 30 years now, I think. I'm almost sure. I think in 1990. So, or about 30 years at least. And so we got to know Skip actually. After he had been at the ministry he was at there, he moved to a ministry in central New Hampshire. And when we were first married, we didn't go to the ministry or the church kind of that he was serving then, but we went to a church that partnered with them for many things. So we got to know him pretty well. And then through him, got to know Pam and her husband Earle, and some of the things that they do ministry at a ski resort, and they do ministry sometimes on skis. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And so this was we've gotten to know them some in that regard. We've done a little bit of that kind of stuff ourselves, as well as we live in a ski resort town. So yeah, that's how we got to know Pam. She's wonderful.
Yeah, she is. She's great. It was good to to hear from her.
Yeah, and she lots of very thoughtful and very insightful about how to interact with people, especially people when they're in a vacation setting. She just has years and years of experience with it.
Definitely. Chris, what's one thing that you learned?
She says this at one point in the interview. Find where people are and meet, or join. Sorry, find where people are and join them there. And I certainly, as fresh expressions, as people who are interested in fresh expressions and different ways to do church outside of a normal, traditional, inherited church setting. Find where people are, meet them there. And you're going to hear a little bit about how Pam's ministry is certainly doing that for a long time. Yeah.
And for me, she touched on this pretty briefly at the beginning, but she was talking about how we are all in unique contexts. And I think that's really important for us to remember. I mean, I think rural contexts are definitely different than like urban or suburban contexts, but even, we have friends that are, their church is not that different from ours. And it's in the same denomination and it's only a half an hour away, but the churches are not the same. No. So whatever we take from these podcasts or resources, we do have to make them our own. But I think it can still be an encouragement.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think that's always going to be the case. You can never, there's no box that you can just buy your ministry in or have somebody send you your ministry and you open it up and it works. And you gotta figure that out for the context in which you are in. So yeah. So before we keep talking for too long, we'll listen to this interview that we had with Pam Morse. All right. We're excited to have Pam Morse on the show today. Pam, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up doing ministry where you're at?
Well, sure. Be happy to. I went to seminary in Boston area, and at that time there was a clergy glut. Way too many clergy. The whole thing was tipping into the ocean. And my husband and I had attended Bates College in Lewiston, Maine. And so we liked Maine a lot. And so when we both finished seminary and we were looking for a place to serve. And that's where we ended up, which was in a pretty somewhat semi-rural area in Maine, in Farmington, Maine. And they were willing to take on a clergy couple, which was really great, which is back in 1989 was a really new thing.
No, and we just even back in 1980, somewhere.
You're much younger than I am. Thank you. And so we just love being in a small community, and that's how we originally kind of started it, what we will generally call rural community ministry. Yeah.
All right, and then now you have this really unique ministry, which is really fun. We've known you for quite a while and had the chance to kind of see some of what you do. And so tell us about what you do for ministry at the moment.
At the moment, I am, along with my husband, co-pastors at Sugarloaf Christian Ministry, which is, let the cat out of the bag, which is at a ski resort in the Western Mountains of Maine. And as we like to say, it's tough work, but somebody has to do it.
Yeah, and we certainly, one of the reasons we've gotten to know you is because we pastor in a town that's also near a ski area. Although our ministry is not quite as connected to the ski area as yours, but it's definitely it is a big part of our community and a place where we do some ministry as well. And so we've shared some of that together. But yeah, it's really it's just been really neat to get to know your story a little bit in that regard and the neat ministry way God's called you to that kind of ministry.
So what are some unique challenges that you face in your particular context?
And thank you for recognizing this is a particular context, and all of our contexts are very particular. I mean, none of us do ministry in any kind of generic way. I mean, it's all particular. And it is rural where I am, and the town where I pastor, which is Carrabassett Valley, Maine, lots of letters, hard to spell. It is rural. And we have about 600 residents. So I think in that way we fit the rural category. But we have 10,000 pillows.
Wow.
And that makes it a really unique context for ministry. I'm in the middle of a ski resort, the Western Mountains of Maine. I'm about 45 miles to Quebec. and about 45 miles to New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
So it is very unique. But unlike some rural areas, it's really very transitional.
Mm.
So in the time that Earle and I have been here, we arrived in, full disclosure, in 1990. We're probably on our fourth or maybe fifth congregation. There's nobody left from that original group at all. Those are some of the things that make it unique. It's also, and I'm so glad you guys are interviewing me, it's Northern New England. So hello.
Yeah, it's definitely
Nobody cares about church. I mean, the only people that are there are the people that really, really want to be there. There's no social cachet. There's no, like, which church do you go? I mean, there's none of that. Yeah. No. That's some of the things. There's more. You want more particulars, or is that enough?
Well, you're completely right about the social cachet, right? I always say and people don't even really for the most part around here feel this pressure. The only pressure people ever feel, around us to go to church is if there's some family pressure, but even that is very minimal, even amongst people who have a family history of going to church. So, people who show up, sometimes people show up and they don't know who Jesus is, and maybe they're kind of hearing the gospel initially, but they're definitely looking for something when they show up. They don't just stumble in the doors. So, yeah, which is a different context than other places, certainly.
I think so.
Yeah.
No, I really do think so. And I don't know about where you guys are, but for me, we're the only church in town. Mm-hmm. And that is a kind of another rural marker. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We are the only church in town. We have been the only church in town since our church was founded here. And that's freeing, but it's also kind of lonely at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yep. We're one of two in our town. So, so not quite as much, but close.
Yeah. And but there is still that, we are certainly, as I'm sure you are, we're isolated from kind of clergy, colleague kind of groups and things like that. Zoom and Skype and those kinds of things have made that a little more, possible. Certainly we've all learned that through the pandemic, but those, relationships with other clergy, which can be, really helpful in our context, you have to work to make those happen a lot of times. And there's not, you only have a couple other options usually, which is fine. But you do have to kind of work through that. So,
now, what do you see as God's specific mission for your particular context?
Well, it's interesting. It kind of flows from that. One of the things that's a positive about being the only church in town is that when you want to do something, you have to partner with people who are not in the church. Mm-hmm. And that's awesome. So we partner with the mountain. We partner with the library. We partner with the Lions Club. We partner, in other words, you have to get out because that's who's out there. I mean, we partner with the ski club or whatever. And so that's actually a really good positive. And for our specific mission or a particular context, I do need to say our ministry was founded by a man named Skip Schwartz, who was here for about 4 years and who is now retired. And he had a vision for reaching people coming to the ski mountain for vacation. Mm-hmm. We kind of thought if we can connect with folks when they're relaxed, when they're enjoying life, then they might slow down enough to listen. Mm-hmm. And then also when people are in a crisis, we can be here to minister to. And that often happens when you're on a ski hill, or when anytime you have a lot of 10,000 people together.
Yes.
So our ministry, unlike say compare and contrast to other rural ministries, it was very specific. So I actually looked it up in our Constitution. The ministry will seek to minister to the Sugarloafer and the people of Carrabassett Valley. Secondarily, the ministry will reach out to people of surrounding towns. So our ministry is very focused. And a Sugarloafer is if you've ever been here, if you've ever come, if you've ever identified, then you're a part. So it's a term that the mountain uses that we capture.
Yeah. And I think, while that is certainly unique, it's not that unusual for rural areas to be places where people go to vacation as well. Certainly. And that's probably true more in rural New England. But there's lots of other rural parts of the country where that's true. And so, while it's definitely something that's good for churches, even if your focus is maybe more on or if your particular ministry context is more focused on the people who are full-time residents of your town. If you have a second, vacation population, finding some of those creative ways to connect with them is important, because there are a huge part. I mean, certainly, for us, we're not. It's really the town south of us that has the 600 residents and 5,000 or 6,000 pillows. But even our town, certainly, there's probably twice as many pillows as there are people who live in town. So we're still certainly on. And so, and we have definitely had people who come through over the years. But I think to really connect, especially like you're talking about with those sugar loafers, you really have to be very focused on them, because it's a different kind of ministry to people who are often there for just weekends at a time and finding ways to connect with them. So, any particular ways? I know your dissertation, which is amazing. It talks a lot about.
Me.
I know. One of the best things about doing a podcast like this is you read a bunch of stuff you wouldn't necessarily read, which is great.
Well, I hope I've done something helpful in it for you.
So you talk about the family that came and baptized and had like a baptismal ceremony right away. And if you wanted to share a version of that story, and I didn't ask you that ahead of time, so I apologize for that. But it's a really neat story that kind of encapsulates the kind of ministry God's called you guys to.
Oh, sure. That's actually a wonderfully precious story. And I probably changed the names to something, and I don't remember what I changed the names to. Not that they would care. But we do have a family here that lives in New York State, but has a place here. And when their daughter was born, this was such an important place to them that they want her to be baptized here. Well, that produced a couple of questions, not the least of which is that we're a Baptist church. We don't baptize babies. But, we support people in the journey that they're in. And so we said, well, how can we work with you? Because they came from a Reformed tradition. And they said, well, we'd love to do this at Downhill Worship, which I'll have to explain now that I've put in a crazy word. And so the parents kind of did the baptism with me kind of supporting them as in one of our services. And they brought water from home in New York. I'm trying to think, there was 3 places. They brought it from their river nearby. I think maybe it was the river here in town, and snow from the hill. And they mixed it all together, and they used that to baptize their daughter with their friends, with our downhill worshipers, in winter outside on the side of a ski. And that's pretty cool. And that couple since then actually become members of our board, actually. So
that's really cool.
That was really important. Yep.
So tell us about this downhill worship.
And that, if there's one thing I could say, and I'm sure we'll get to this about rural ministry, is, find where people are and go join them. And I would imagine for a lot of rural churches, similar to mine, part of the reason that people are there, unless they just feel stuck there, is because they connect somehow to the great big outdoors entity. And they're willing to let go of not being able to get their nails done or go to Starbucks or whatever, because they value so much that connection to outdoors. So for us, it's find people where people are and then join them. So the first way in which this community, Sugarloaf Christian Ministry, worshiped was outside in the winter on skis with something we call downhill worship. We meet at a sign, we take the chairlift up together, and we do a run together where we stop a couple of times and we reflect on whatever the theme of the day is. You do see outdoor worship services at some other ski resorts, but they stand still. And sometimes they're overlooking this lovely vista. But it's warm and it's sunny, and that's not Maine. So we can't stand still and look out, and you got to keep a move on. So that's what downhill worship is. And I was just thinking, matter of fact, I shared one just a couple of weeks ago. Give an example of how do you get this to work? At our first stop, we gathered together. We just shared our first names. And I said, do you prefer to ski? No. Which do you find more problematic? Skiing in flat light or skiing when it's really, really cold and windy? What bothers you more? High wind or flat light? And we just took off from there.
Nice.
Everybody can answer that question, right?
I was going to say it's flat light. It's the only answer you can get.
I don't like the cold. I'm a fair weather skier.
Thank you, Chris. It's flat light. No, that day we had 100% were voting for flat light. Now, of course, that day it was incredibly flat light. And I just come back from 3 weeks in Europe where I swear I didn't see the sun. And so it was but we used that as a jumping off point to talk about sources of light. Then we talked about the scripture, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And then he says, you are the light of the world. And so each time we would talk a little bit about that. So we took what was kind of going on around us and, ingested it and applied it. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's
incredibly helpful. And the kind of thing that, yes, your church is it's built into the DNA of your ministry, but that so many, I think of us as, or churches that are maybe a little more traditional in the DNA that got them going, as ways that we can, remember, hey, what are people up to? What are they doing? How can the church, instead of trying to start its own thing up or do its own thing, how do we join in with what's going on and bring the gospel into Fresh Expressions is certainly all about that, right? Finding the place where you can find what's going on, connect with it, and make it a space for Jesus. So
yeah, well,
that almost sounds like you're forcing yourself on the space, but opening it up to be a space for Jesus. Yeah.
For the folks that I'm dealing with, their sacred space, their sacred place is on the mountain. So why would I insist that it's more holy for them to be inside a building? That doesn't make any sense to them. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. I will say, when we finished that downhill worship the other day, I had an 11-year-old with me who had not done it before. And I loved it. I wish I could have gotten it on, tape. He said, I like church outdoors way more than church inside. I'm like, my work is done.
That's great.
Good for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
Now, when you read ministry books or you go to conferences, what are some challenges you face in trying to apply the what you're learning there to different contexts that you're serving in?
Yeah. This is so difficult. This is what makes my head pop off. For years, and you have to remember, my husband and I have been here for 32 years. So we were doing, I think we were doing Fresh Expressions before there was a name for it.
Certainly.
But for years, I just felt like we were the ugly duckling of churches. Like we never quite fit in. Nothing I read, nothing I attended, it didn't really make sense. I remember when we were in field ed back in seminary, the pastor that was in charge of us, turned to my husband and said, unless you like sitting inside and drinking tea with basically like the old ladies, you are not going to make it in ministry. And it struck him to the heart so much that, it basically made him cry. Cause he's like, I don't think that's the only way to do ministry. What I forgot, because I would often say to folks, this is just feel like the ugly duckling. What I would often forget, though, is that the ugly duckling does turn into a beautiful swan, but it still doesn't look like anybody else in the barnyard.
That's true.
I have to go back and find that old folk story. So I still have to re-sign everything I read, everything I watch. I can't take anything in and just apply it. There's no program.
Yeah.
Right? You probably find that too. And that's probably
I was going to say, I think certainly in our context, and I would imagine in most rural contexts, it's very, very rare to find something that you can just sort of plug and play, apply to what you're doing. And that's probably true in non-rural contexts as well. But certainly we've never found anything that you're like, oh yeah, I will just do this exactly like that. No, definitely not.
I remember years ago, there was a guy years and years ago. He came to the church and he was from Florida, and he thought that we really needed to do evangelism explosion. That's going to date me and anybody else who's listening. And it was this thing where you kind of would go door to door and kind of explain Jesus or whatever. And I said, you realize there's only at that point, there was 400 people in town. Like, we're going to go through those real quick and alienate all of them. Like, why did you think this was a good idea? And we're like, that was a place in which, we couldn't see eye to eye.
Yeah.
We didn't do it.
Nothing in northern New England. I feel uncomfortable when people come to my door and I'm the pastor. So. But that's very much a New England thing. So yeah, going door to door would be really a complicated way to try to do ministry. Certainly.
So what is a recent story that reminded you that you live in a rural place?
Let's see. Well, I mean, the easy one is, you have this brilliant idea on Saturday night, but there's no way you can get supplies for Sunday morning, right? You read those children time things, or you get something and you're like, oh, I just need, an avocado. And you're like, yeah, no, it's not going to happen.
Definitely.
Geography matters,
Yes.
And I don't know where you are, but for where we are, I usually can explain it when I go and speak at places. I usually say, where I live, it's 42 miles to the nearest stoplight.
Yeah.
We're only like 20, so you're doing really well.
Oh, in terms of like, what does rural life mean?
Yeah.
So for us, it's an hour to the nearest hospital, 2 hours to a significant hospital. All that pastoral care stuff you read about, even before COVID, that was extremely, extremely difficult.
Yeah.
A number of years ago, this is more serious, but it talks about rural ministry. So during Christmas vacation week, the mountain won't like me to tell this, but it's true. We did have a problem with one of the chairlifts, and the chairs derailed. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the chairs fell off the lift, and the cable fell down. And this was during vacation week, and the lift was full, and nobody died, but people were severely injured, and they ended up in Portland, which is a solid 2.5 hours away. And how do you, number one, get them there? How do you support them there? I remember, and because it was Christmas vacation week, there were, it was like 3 out of the 4, was one family. There were 3 out of the 4 family members were all in the charity. Mm-hmm. And so I remember, we literally packed up, Earle and I went into their place. I didn't really know them, but we went into their place by their permission, packed up all their stuff, put everything in their suitcases, took down their Christmas tree, emptied their fridge, and everything, because they're not coming back. I don't know if that's a really good example, but geography it matters.
Yeah.
Every day. You can't age in place here. Really hard. We don't have a nursing home. We don't have any of those facilities. I imagine in a lot of places. How do you get old here?
It is really hard.
Yeah, we talk about, for people who it's probably a little easier to age in place here. Although there isn't a nursing home in town, you got to go quite a ways. No, there isn't. But there is. We do have some like retirement housing, sort of
like senior housing,
essentially. But when people lose, like without a vehicle, and there's a social service agency in town that does work on that kind of stuff, and works on rides, which is great. But you lose a vehicle or your ability to drive, and it becomes incredibly hard to live here. Just to get the medication you need, to go to the doctor, to go to the store, the doctor, all that kind of stuff. It's very hard. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. So we were fascinated by the way you spoke about place in your dissertation. How do you think people's lack of sense of place has impacted the way church does ministry?
Well, one of the things I think is important for us to remember is, your church building might be your place, but it's not their place. Mm-hmm. So, our buildings could be used as an asset, but they're just that, assets. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're not more holy than the places where people are hanging out. Mm-hmm. And that's really hard, I think, for church people to really value and appreciate. For some people, their ballpark might be their sacred place, or their cornfield might be where they feel closest to God. And if we keep insisting that they actually have to come into our building and our sacred place in order for them to know and experience God where we've really missed the boat, because Jesus really didn't do that. He never insisted people come to him. Like he was out there. Right?
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I think we sometimes underestimate the value of place. I mean, like where we go camping every summer to the same place. And as soon as we get there, we know it. We feel comfortable there. We don't have to figure out where everything is. We just can relax. And so I can totally understand how that would be, how that is important for us to think about in the church life, that if we expect people to always come into our building, that we lose out on a lot of stuff, like a lot of opportunities to minister to people and to reach out to them.
And it becomes a power thing. I mean, we don't intend it to be that way, but there's a power differential there, and it's just a threshold. That whole kind of threshold anxiety, particularly in New England. Just going across the threshold into a religious building can really just give people the willies. And those of us who are comfortable there, we don't think about it. And it's interesting you should mention about that place you go on vacation all the time. I mean, that is part of the work that I did. And what's so important for the context of the ministry that I'm involved in is that I deal a lot with what we call second homeowners, and that they have a deeper connection to the place here at the mountain than their suburban home, which they may have changed a couple of times as their jobs changed, as the size of their family changed, those kinds of needs, but they keep their vacation homes. And those vacation homes become the home of their hearts. Which is really, really interesting.
It is. And we certainly run into that when we do weddings at Stratton, which is the mountain near us, because it's often with families that have...
they've lived there for, 40 years or something like that. And that's where they go on vacation, and they feel more connected to the mountain than they do back home. And so they do sort of a destination wedding, trying to just enjoy the space that they enjoy. And how do you think, how can the church address the feelings of the strong sense of place, like the rural church? How can we address that?
I think that one of the ways that we can really do that, and particularly in kind of rural America, where sometimes, they might say, well, hey, we're out here, is to celebrate as many opportunities as you can. To find ways to celebrate the place you're in, and to just acknowledge that God loves to hang out there. So, and God loves to hang out where you are. So, is it the Harvest Festival? Is it the county fair? Is it a local crop that, is really famous here? What are those things that people love about where you are? Why do people stay there? What is that? And to come alongside, and this is something that I've learned, again, not having another church in town, having all the players and partners that I work with be people who are already in the community in a way that's not religious, that don't have those kind of hangups that we, particularly in New England, have. How do I come alongside other groups that are helping folks to appreciate their locale? So is it the snowmobile club? Is it the Grange? Is it the skateboard park kids? I mean, it doesn't have to be an age thing, and to help them celebrate what it is that makes that the place where they are so powerful. And if I could just make one little pet peeve about get outside. If you haven't heard that yet, get outside. Jesus mostly spoke and taught and healed outside. And it's so apparent that it's when he goes inside that the authors tell you he's going inside. Otherwise, you can assume he's outside.
It's true.
Yeah. And so I think that, and if we're involved in the outdoors, I think outdoor ministry keeps things connected to the world around us. And you can't drone on for as long if you're outside.
Can't do quite as many verses to the song, right? You gotta wrap it up.
And you can't talk so long.
It's 100% accurate.
Keep it crisp. And oftentimes they're not like sitting in these like, I don't know. It's just Jesus was outside. Just get it.
Yeah. One of my favorite places I ever did planning for a funeral was one of the first funerals I ever did here. It was sugaring season, which is huge in southern Vermont.
There you go.
The family, they're like, well, we're boiling tonight. You want to come over? And actually after that, I spent many nights hanging out with them which unfortunately they don't boil anymore, but the family kind of moved on from it. But it was, and a great way to kind of bring Jesus into the moment, and also just have a lot of fun, right? I mean, it's who doesn't want to go and make maple syrup for a night? It's amazing.
Exactly. How sweet that was.
It was really sweet.
Really sweet. But sweeter as the night went on, actually.
You also talk about you have a discussion on place. You talk about the overemphasis on the spiritual aspects of life while diminishing the physical, that it can lead to devaluing a place. What are some ways that your unique ministry is able to use its emphasis on the physical to make real connections with your community and the people who live in it?
I don't know if I can answer this well. It's a great question. It's really hard. But what I can do is just talk and see if anybody answers that question.
That's what I would do. So.
Well, one of the things that we try to do is don't just take whatever you do inside and take it outside. Because that's not valuing place, right? That's just valuing the stuff that we like to do. And we're going to just go do it. It can work, but it's not the best. When you do that, one of the things you'll notice is how artificial some of the things we are that can kind of work inside. But when we get outside, they don't work that well. And I think the other thing too is, our focus, as I said, it's not about getting folks out there to come in here. It's about going to where people are and to engage them in their own comfort zone, engage them in their own sacred place, in their own sacred space. And Jesus went up on the mountain to pray. Jesus spoke from the fields and the mountains. Jesus made all of this earth holy ground. And our kind of unwillingness to adapt to that, we lose, So we have a couple of different things. Obviously, we mentioned downhill worship. One of the other ones, I'm trying to think of what's translatable to other places. We've worked for number of years with the mountain. We actually have an amphitheater on the top of the mountain, which we built in cooperation with the mountain, obviously, because they own the mountain itself. But at that amphitheater during the summer months, people take a chairlift up and we meet in this amphitheater. It has great, great sound, but we try not to do the traditional stuff. They are actually seated and they are actually outside, but we try to make that moment. It's right out in public. People are walking by, people are hiking, people are taking the chairlift to do other things. So we're right there in the midst of everything. And I'm trying to think of like some examples. Like one day I'll say, hey, let's look at the clouds, So I'll lay down on the pews and we'll look up at the clouds and we'll, see what's up there. Like everybody's done that. Everybody can do that, Or one of my favorite ones last summer is I had everybody to get up and go find a tree and just spend some time with it. And, there are thousands and thousands of trees out there, but each one's unique. And kind of make that connection. There's so many ways to just value what I think God values, which is the place where people are. Sound like an old record, don't I?
That's okay. So we're going to ask you a more personal question about your personal faith. What is one spiritual practice that you have found meaningful for your faith journey?
Again, sounds like a broken record. One of the things I grew up in suburbia, by the way. I grew up on the T line outside of Boston. So I did not grow up rural. I grew up, wasn't actually a pavement jungle, but truly, I grew up with all the amenities of suburban life. So one of the things that's been super important for me is to take a walk, get outside. I try to do that every day that I'm here at my office, leave the building, smell the leaves, the fall leaves, crunch in the snow. I do have a note right here on my office that says right now, must walk before 3 p.m. And those of you who live in Northern New England will know why. Because it's dark. I remember years ago taking a walk out here, and I just kind of walk up and just wandered into the woods. And there was this wonderful rock. I just kind of sat on it, and I was just frustrated with God. He was like, "Go out for a walk." I'm sitting out here, and he says, "You just want me to go out here and take a walk? Is that all you want me to do?" God was like, "Yeah, pretty much. Just be here." So hard. I'm not a person being, right? That's an important part of my. There's a lot of other things that I do, but that's probably the one that I probably am always the most in. As you can see my office, I'm surrounded by books. I'm surrounded by all the greatest thinkers. And sometimes I use those as a substitute. No, kidding.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing with us today. Before we close out, if people want to connect with you online, how can they do that?
Well, they can connect me online with our Facebook page, which is Sugarloaf Area Christian Ministry. We do have a website in dire need of help. So if anybody would like to take pity upon a poor woman who's like doing too much, that is just at sugarloafministry.com. You will mock it when you see it, but I can only do some. I also wanted to mention those of folks who are kind of interested in kind of pursuing more, like how do we get outside or how do we connect with place? There are a couple of good groups, and I can send you those links. EngageWorship.org, which is out of the United Kingdom, is really good. The Wild Church Network, which is really interesting. And we have a new church in New Hampshire, Alpine Church 603. I don't know if you're connected with them at all. That's just like they only meet outside. Like talk about radical. I reach heaven off. So those are. I'll make sure I send those the link. But yeah, our Facebook page, our website. You can put my email address right in the bio link. Pam@sugarloafministry.com. Love to hear from folks who are interested in any of the kind of things that I'm interested in. I really appreciate you. I wouldn't have thought of myself as like in rural church ministry, but the more I kind of looked at this and reflected, I'm like, yeah, I am. It's a weird duck.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of the people you minister to there's a lot of second homeowners are suburbanites. So, which we can really get because a lot of people who are second homeowners here, are you're more suburban Eastern Massachusetts. We're more suburban New York, Greater New York. But yeah, but still, but at the same time, it's in a 600 person town. You have less people in your town than we do. Yeah. So yeah, you really count as and 42 minutes to a stoplight. You're rural.
Okay, well, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and
my pleasure.
Hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Be well. Hope to see you in person again soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Take care.
Small towns were once the core of North America, and churches literally stood in their center. Decades of population and economic shifts, combined with practical challenges, have taken their toll. Rural regions and the churches that bind them now find themselves in unfamiliar territory. While so much has changed, the need for local bodies of Christ is as important as it has ever been.
But if rural North America has changed, What does it look like for the rural church to experience revival? It will begin with rediscovering the mission at the heart of the gospel, where God sends Jesus to minister to the small towns of Galilee, and Jesus sends his church to the whole world. It will be driven by visionary pastors and lay leaders who take risks and try new approaches to reach those who have no church home.
Rural Revival Summit is a 2-day digital event happening April 21st and April 22nd that will introduce you to other ministry leaders serving in small town and rural contexts to provide examples and inspiration for being the church and addressing the needs unique to your community.
At the Rural Revival Summit, you will meet other small town church leaders who understand the struggles you're facing. Hear stories from real-life practitioners who are forming new and different expressions of the church that uniquely connect with their rural settings, and explore practical approaches to church leadership and discipleship developed by fellow rural ministry leaders.
Small town North America has changed and will keep changing. The Rural Revival Summit will give you new hope for what God can do in your town, your church, and in the lives of the neighbors you love. Join us on April 21st and 22nd, 2023 for the summit. Find out more at freshexpressions.com/rural revival.
All right, welcome back, and we're just so thankful for the opportunity there to interview Pam Morse. And one of the things we want to do at the end of each of the interviews is just say each of us have a chance to say one of the things that we took away from the interview. So, Kathleen, what was something that you took away from our interview with Pam?
I really appreciated that she talked about how buildings are not more holy than not buildings, that we can know and experience God outside of the church building. And I think sometimes we can get stuck in doing everything out of our church building. And it can be a challenge, especially given rural areas. There's not a lot of places sometimes that you can meet, but there's always outside.
There is. And did you share that one just because we went like 6.5 years without a building? 7 years without a building? No.
Yeah. We had to be real creative.
maybe at least appreciated that.
Yes.
Right? In that regard. Okay. So for me, I found that when she said that find ways to celebrate the place where we live and partner with organizations in the places where they celebrate the community that you're in. And one thing that, and this has been tricky, I think, maybe for all churches, but certainly one of the things that was hard, there are many things that were hard about the way that the COVID changed the way that we had to interact with one another for ministry. But one of the things that was hard is it became hard to celebrate and do all the kinds of things that we do to kind of celebrate the people we are. And certainly I remember hearing advice many times in the past about, make sure to celebrate the good things that God's doing, and the little victories that you're having as a church community, because it's easy to get, we live in a world where there's obviously lots of hurt and lots of things going on in the world around us. And it can become daunting to try to think about how we're gonna try to minister in all those circumstances. But when we see God doing something really neat, and we can see the ways that God has used us to do some neat things, we should celebrate those things. And we can get outside to do those things. We had a sledding party at church yesterday. Yeah. And it was a little chilly, but it was nice to get outside and have fun doing that. And that was a fun thing to do. So yeah.
Yeah. Chris had to go out walk on a pond to retrieve a sled.
Yes.
The head.
Yes, it was important to not send one of the little ones. Although in some ways, maybe we should have sent the little ones. The pond was fine. It was
it was very small. Yeah.
And I enjoyed the sledding part. I don't know. Kathleen does not really love the cold. You seem to endure it pretty well yesterday.
Yeah, I hung out with someone else who probably doesn't.
We did not have a fire like a
we didn't
campfire.
have a fire.
We often have in the past.
Yeah.
That just didn't happen this year. We should do that for you next time.
Yeah, but it's okay. I embrace it.
Yeah, exactly. So, we live in Vermont. You have to some extent embrace the cold.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chris, tell us one thing that has happened recently in your life that reminded us that we live in a rural location.
Yeah, certainly. So one of the things we talked about firefighting and how that has often opened up opportunities. Actually, just a couple of days ago, had a call. And one of the things, our fire department, we don't do medical. We have a separate ambulance service in town that runs basically all medical calls in town, which quite frankly for me is, they do amazingly and important stuff as well. But for me, it's good because the time commitment to do both of those kinds of things would be way too much. And the time commitment on medical calls just wouldn't work in my schedule. So it's pretty rare actually that we help out with a medical call as the fire department, but once in a while, if they need a little extra help lifting, or if they need help getting someone out of a circumstance, then they will call us for extra help. So the other night, I was woken up in the middle of the night with my pager going off, something that actually doesn't happen that often, thankfully, because the older I get, the harder it is to bounce back from losing a couple hours of sleep in the middle of the night. But anyway, pager goes off, and I heard that there was a driveway that wasn't plowed and somebody needed to go to the hospital, and that they were going to need some help to get this person to the ambulance. And because I heard the street name that it was on, and because I'm pretty familiar with the family and the circumstance there through lots of other ministry things that have happened over the years, I knew exactly where it was. I knew I had a pretty good idea of who the person was actually that was going to need the help. And I knew and certainly knew the family well enough to be able to interact with them in a way that was going to be helpful. So I would have responded anyway, but I made sure I ran, got down in the car, helped. We headed over to where the call was, made sure that I headed quickly up to the house. There was already an EMT on scene who was doing a bunch of medical stuff, but I was able to kind of help out with some of the logistics and things like that, and hopefully helping the family feel a little bit more comfortable. And that's just the kind of thing when you live in a small community. As a pastor, you're going to find your way, and you don't have to be a pastor, just as a person who's trying to be a person of peace for Jesus in a place like that, where you have these opportunities to help out your neighbors because you know them, and you know the circumstances, and you know how you can be beneficial in the circumstances. So, that was something that happened the other night. That's a pretty unusual story. There have been other medical calls I've gone on, certainly because of we're helping out, or when I've known that it was somebody from church for whom the medical call was for, because I recognize the address. But in general, I in general don't do a lot of medical stuff, but there's certainly opportunity there. We have a couple people at our church who have been on the ambulance service for a long, long time, and they find lots of ministry opportunities as they're obviously there to help medically, but they often know the stories of what's going on. They've been living in our town for a long time, for their whole lives. So finding those places where you know your neighbors, you know what's going on in their lives, you can be helpful in ways like that. Yeah, really, really beneficial stuff. So, it doesn't have to obviously be through the fire department or EMTs. There's lots of coaches and things like that for kiddos and over the years that do that kind of stuff. People who are involved in other groups at school, things like that, or groups with adults too. So, find those places.
Yes, absolutely. Before we say goodbye, if you would take a few moments to rate us on wherever you're listening to us, we'd really appreciate it. We want to be an encouragement to the rural church. And one way that you can help us is by giving us a rating. You can also share us with your friends, and you could share us on social media. We have posts on Fresh Expressions, our Fresh Expressions social media pages. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So if you need something to share, you can do it that way. But we would really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Yeah,
it just helps get the word out about the podcast and hopefully build a bit more of a community here. And hopefully all together, we will continue to find ways to see the gospel move forward in our rural communities.
Rural Revival Podcast is part of the Rural Revival Summit, an initiative of Fresh Expressions happening April 21st through 22nd. The summit is a 2-day digital event exploring new possibilities for small town churches. Learn more at freshexpressions.com/Rural Revival Summit.
Fresh Expressions is a worldwide movement of everyday missionaries who want to see churches thrive in the places we live, eat, work, and play by leveraging the creativity and endurance of the inherited church. To learn a simple 5-phase process for starting a new expression of church that works in small towns, big cities, and everywhere in between, go to freshexpressions.com/how-to-start.
To connect with this podcast, you can email us at podcasts@freshexpressions.com.
Rural Revival Podcast is hosted by Kathleen Blackie and Chris Blackie. It's edited by Joel Limbond and produced by Kathleen Blackie and Chris Morton. Our North American director is Dr. Christopher Becker.
If you have learned something or been encouraged by this podcast, please help us spread the word. You can give us a review on Apple Music or Spotify and share this episode on social media.
Let us end with this prayer for town and rural areas from the Book of Common Prayer. Lord Christ, when you came among us, you proclaimed the kingdom of God in villages, towns, and lonely places. Grant that your presence and power may be known throughout this land. Have mercy upon all of us who live and work in rural areas, and grant that all the people may give thanks to you for food and drink and all other bodily necessities of life. Respect those who labor to produce them, and honor the land and the water from which these good things come. All this we ask in your holy name. Amen.